All right, Kevin, you ready?
Yeah, we're about ready. We have a good room of people.
About 15 people here, maybe.
All right.
So the
Should we?
blue sheets are going around. Matt's gonna do Jabber, and Magnus is gonna do notes. He asked for somebody to help him on the Etherpad. Somebody could do that. That'd be awesome. Anybody? Bueller? Oh. Kenda's gonna help out.
Excellent. All right, let's get going then. All right, everyone. This is Cdni. Thanks for coming. I guess for you guys, it's the end of your week. Hopefully everyone had a good week. Phil, you want to go next slide? This is Cdni. This is, I guess we have minute takers and blue sheets. Next slide. I don't know if there's just like really bad lag, but all right, there's the note well. Everyone should have seen this all week. Note well that all of your contributions are subject to the rules of the IETF, IPR, and whatnot included. Next slide, please. Ooh, my connection's really bad. This is our agenda. If anyone has any complaints, now is the time. Otherwise, we have 3 presenters today, and then the chairs have a couple of questions at the end. And if no one has any objections to this agenda, we'll go ahead and get started. And Phil, you're up first.
All right, nobody's objecting. All right. End of the day, end of the week. No? Better? All right, I'm just going to hold on to it. I hate these mics. All right, so what have we done since Prague? No. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, so dropped to draft 13, lucky number 13. Here's what we've changed on here. We added a registry for Cdni STT. That was to do dash support so that they could add different values in that. We added back the text about the key usage, symmetric versus asymmetric. This was brought up on the mailing list. Relatively no big deal. Stated that key distribution is out of scope. I also went and made the HTTP adaptive streaming support more generic. And I was asked to not call it token chaining. Was told that the security guys were offended by this because it wasn't actually doing chaining by including content in the previous token going into the next token. So it's now called token renewal. And some other small typos and stuff like that. Really? There we go. Okay, so changes from 13 going forward. We're still not done. We have an implementation though. So rough consensus and running code. We have running code now. This was done at my employer, Comcast. And during the implementation, Chris Lemons, who I believe is on the Meet Echo, ran into a few issues, and he opened some GitHub PRs. So these are some of them were real minor. I was able to merge them and actually get them into draft 13. Some of them are a little more involved, and so I wanted to bring them to the working group and see if we could get some consensus on them. So the first one, number 28, replace the audience claim with the Cdni IP claim. I'll explain why this is kind of a big deal in a minute. The next one is number 29, make Cdni ETS mandatory when using the signed token chain. This one seems pretty trivial, but wasn't quite sure about how to word it. So we could put it in the claim description and just say, you know, A requires B, B requires A kind of deal, or we could put it in the actual token renewal section and describe that to properly do it, you need to have both. So it's kind of a trivial change, but wanted to get the wording right for it. Number 30, changing subclaim to Cdni UC and introduced new subclaim. This is kind of related to number 28, and I have extra slides about this, but both of those are kind of unfortunate parts of the JWT RFC. Number 31 is clarify the definition of parameter. This has to do with the fact that query parameters are not actually specified anywhere. They're just kind of a convention that everybody uses. So we figured we could explain how we intend to use them in the document. Number 32 is chicken and egg problem with URI containers. This is how we need to specify to strip off the URI signing parameter before we validate. I think it was something that we kind of thought was obvious, but didn't, you know, took for granted. But when somebody's implementing it, they need to know that. And number 33, limiting globs in the URI container. So let me go on to the next ones here. So replacing the odd claim with the Cdni IP claim. Is this a laser pointer? Yeah. So this is from the JWT spec. And it says that the principal intended to process a JWT must identify itself with a value in the audience claim. And we were using this for the client IP. So the CDN is clearly not going to identify itself with any value in that audience claim. And it says if it does not do that, it must be rejected. So there's very specific usage for the audience claim, and we're just kind of misusing it. So the PR for this essentially adds a new claim inside the Cdni namespace and treats it how we treated the audience. So it's basically a new claim with a new name. So any thoughts on that, or bad feelings or good feelings? I saw Matt back there nodding. Okay. This is the Cdni ETS being mandatory for signed token chaining. Seems fairly straightforward. I would love to have some feedback on the PR. If I don't get any, I guess I'll just come up with some wording for it, but I think we need this. This is another one from the JWT spec where we kind of ran afoul of it. So there's two things about this one that are really interesting. So it's of type string or URI. And what they define that as any string, but if it contains a colon, it has to be a URI. So all of our containers, first of all, are prefixed with something like, you know, URI-regex colon. So we'd have to fix that for one. But in the regex case, if you're making a regex against a URI, you're most likely going to put a colon in it, and it's most likely not going to be a valid URI. So an idea that was tossed out to correct this was do something like escape the colon. Unfortunately, it also specifies that no transformations or canonicalizations are applied. So unfortunately, they just don't want us to use this for anything other than URIs or strings that are not URIs. So this creates another new claim under the Cdni namespace that has the same behavior as what we had in sub before. So it's kind of a big change because it's a new claim, but I think we have to not be breaking the JWT spec. Any thoughts on that one? I guess you guys are all as wiped out as I am. All right. Continue on. This is what I was talking about, the no real definition of query parameter or path parameter. So we just need to have some text in there to clarify that. This is talking about the URI signing package needs to be removed before matching the URI. And we need just a plain way to do that. So limiting the globs in the URI container. Basically, the globs can be, because the way they're specified, they're overly greedy, and you can make them match a URI that they weren't intended to by adding a query parameter and then putting the matching string on the end, and it'll match any URI on the front end. So the change that was put in this PR from Chris made it a bit more strict, but I wanted to bring up the issue again on whether we need this container because we have the full regex support. When we added the regex support, the feeling was, why get rid of the globs? Because they were simpler to implement and simpler on CPU, but in light of security issues and ones that we might not find in the future, I was just wondering if everyone thought we still needed this, we could just add this text and keep it, or we could remove it entirely. Everybody familiar with the glob, the pattern one that I'm talking about? What's that?
Kent Leong. Actually, I assume this is the simple pattern case, right? Is that the one?
So can you speak up? I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. The microphone. Yeah, so the glob that you're talking about, this is a simple. I mean, basically there are three cases, right? So this is not the regex, right? This is
Correct. It's a simple one.
okay. Yeah. And like you said, I think, I mean, I kind of said it in the mailing list too, right? That it's more of a historical, you know, that initially we had something, well, we call it simple, right? For the reason that it didn't require the full regex and all that stuff. So I don't know if the rationale that we had before is gone now. I mean, I think that's the part, you know, I mean, there was a rationale to be able to simply, you know, I didn't say that. So I guess I'm still a bit on the fence on this one, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was the original one.
Yeah.
And then when we added regex, we said, well, is there a good reason to remove this one? And I don't think there was. So we just said, well, why not? We'll give people the option. It'll be in the draft. People can implement it if they want or use it if they want. But now it seems like there might be a reason to remove it. And I'm kind of on the fence on it too, but.
Echoing for Chris Lemons, this actually steps back a little bit. Another issue with the subclaim is it is designed for the subject, which seems to be interpreted as the user bearing the token.
Yes. So let's go back to that one. So his thought was that it was about, can you read that again?
Another issue is that the subclaim is designed for the subject, which seems to be interpreted as the user bearing the token.
Okay, yeah. So he did some research because it wasn't, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but he did some research and there wasn't anything specific in JWT, the JWT RFC. I didn't find anything in there either, but he looked at other usage in other RFCs and found that to generally be the case. So I don't think that that was anything that we had to change, but if we wanted to be in line with the way other people used it, we should. But I think the colon issue and the no transformations issue are much more cut and dry, and I think they supersede that. So Do you have something?
Matthew Miller. I mean, at this point, it's kind of, I mean, like you said, the syntactical requirements kind of moot it. But I just want to point out, I mean, that subject is meant for the entity the claims are over. Claims are over the URI. It seemed appropriate, except for the syntactic problem.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, I guess it's a moot point at this time. So, all right, let me jump back here. And I think that
Phil?
was the. Yes.
Can I jump in? I am in favor, this is as an individual, I am in favor of the new subclaims. In general, I think the Cdni specific ones make more sense since we aren't using them exactly like everyone else is. And then on the last slide, the question was about the glob. If folks are okay with the regex, I don't really see a good reason that we have to keep the limited glob. We had originally done it just to make it simpler, and it was partially because we decided we didn't want the regex. But if we're going to take the regex, then I don't really personally see a huge point in keeping the other.
Okay. I will create a PR that removes the simple pattern matching and post a link to it on the mailing list and give people a chance to give more feedback. And if we don't hear anything, we can go ahead and merge it. Unless there's
So, Chris Lemon, selling past the close. JWT RFC just calls it the subject, but doesn't define what the subject is. And he determined subject by looking at existing implementations.
okay.
Kent Leung. So yeah, I just want to make a comment that I think there's just silence speaks. I think I agree with pretty much what you presented, basically, right? Just the last one on the simple, that's the one that I had a little bit on the fence issue, but I agree what I think the way go forth, right? Just probably create, delete it, publish it, and give one last chance for people to say, I don't like it, right? Otherwise, that's we could just go with it.
All right. Sounds good.
I'm going to insert myself in here as chair then. So do we think with version 14, we'll be ready to go to last call? Do you have thoughts on where we are?
Well, we have an implementation now, and we will actually, so the use case for it will be in February. You could figure out what that might be, Comcast, NBC. I'll be able to publish after we get real usage and before London. And so in London, I will feel really good about saying yes. And right now, I would say I'm really optimistic about saying yes.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to insert myself again. It's 5 a.m. here, and my brain's not working very well. We skipped the doc update, but there weren't really any doc updates. There are no new RFCs. We had the bunch come out before Prague. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep skipping that, and we can move on and let Frederick start.
Hi, Frederick Fio. So I will present the last update from Prague. So I will start with providing some insight of the update we have. Next, I will explain which support we added for the delegation methods, particularly on Acme Star and TLS subsets draft. Then I will talk about the definition of secure delegation metadata. We have two options that we consider in this draft and which need to be discussed actually. So we have some pros and cons, and finally we consider other area for study. So to recall a bit, the goal of this document is to propose some extension to the Cdni metadata interface to exchange delegation metadata. This version 2 updates the delegation object we defined in the version 1. So in the version 1 we had support for short-term automatically renewed certificate, the Acme Star draft. And in this version, we consider delegated credential for TLS subsets. So the TLS subset draft, which has been recently adopted by the TLS working group. So to recall a bit the Acme Star draft, the use case is that the UCDN delegates delivery to a DCDN requesting the CA to issue a short-term automatically renewed certificate. And here we add a new metadata object to support this method, basically by adding some properties, namely star proxy and Acme server. So these two properties should allow the DCDN to contact the UCDN and to renew periodically the certificate. So basically, this could be used at the initialization phase and at the renewal phase. In this version 2, we add the support for TLS subsets. So the UCDN delegates delivery to DCDN using its own credential without the need to request a certificate from the CA. So the TLS subset method. So here we add a new metadata object to support this method. So we have the subset delegation method with a bunch of properties. The credential delegating entity, the credential recipient entity, credential location URI, and periodicity. And those properties, so the credential delegating entity will be, for instance, will be the UCDN. So we need to have the address of the endpoint of the UCDN. Then that will send the delegated credential to the DCDN. And we have the credential recipient entity that basically the DCDN or a server of the DCDN. Then we also have the credential location URI and the periodicity. One important object we defined also is the secure delegation object. Why do we need such an object? It's because in the case that the UCDN delegates the delivery to a DCDN, we need to convey delegation information about how the delegation will be enforced. And to do so, we propose two options that could allow the UCDN to describe a secure delegation for DCDN. So the first option is a secure delegation object defined as a top level object. So this means that we try here to specify the delegation once we define the delegation for all paths and domain of the CDN interconnection in a global object. But currently, we can say that this method doesn't exist in the RFC 806, and thus it requires a new delegation, a new object. Here we call secure delegation. So we have in this object we have of course the delegated domains. We have the path patterns that are concerned by the delegation, and we have the supporting methods, delegation methods for the delegation. The second option we have is to provide an extension to path metadata that is already defined in the RFC 806, and this method involves the definition of delegation metadata for each path URL of the delegated entity. So basically, the idea is to indicate for each path which are the delegation methods that are supported. So a slide that shows some examples. So yes, I think we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so we try here to evaluate the pros and cons of each option. We consider the option 1 as interesting because we can provide easily information about the delegation in one shot. But the drawback is that it extends a bit the Cdni metadata model, so maybe it's not quite clear how to use it for now. The option 2 is obviously fits obviously inside the RFC 806, but the drawback we can say that it may requires to repeat the delegation metadata for each pass. So maybe it could be more greedy. I don't know. So the last slide to say that we as a next step, we envision to identify other needs on Cdni interfaces to support the HTTPS delegation. We might want to find some methods to provide purge or force certificate renewal if necessary, so through other interfaces. The other point is to possibly discuss other delegation solution for Cdni. So here we have listed lurk and OB, so such solutions are not yet accepted in the IETF, but anyway, they can be good candidates for delegation. And we have also the next presentation that could be also interesting. Next slide. So thank you. Bye-bye.
So one comment from Jabber by Robert Mugabe. Do you need to repeat the delegation metadata for each pass? You could make it a different resource / URI and link to it.
That's a possibility, yes. But we think that the option 1 will be maybe more easier to use.
Can I insert myself?
Yeah.
I also think that listing the paths in an object versus having the paths listed elsewhere, I don't know that there's a lot to be saved there. I agree you could link it in order to save on the object itself, but it seems to be, from my personal opinion, this is as an individual and as a metadata author, it's making a custom object just for this one thing, and that wasn't the goal of the metadata interface, right? We tried not to duplicate that data like path data, because the paths apply to other metadata objects, and so the structure of it would be significantly changed by this, and I'm not sure that it's a change in a good way, but if there were more details on why it would be necessary, that would be helpful.
I understand your remark. So yes, maybe the option one would be more concise. I don't know.
Yeah, I took a look through the draft, and there wasn't enough really there for me to come up with a good reason why it's significantly better or necessary. But if you have more on that, then we should talk about it. Anyone else? All right. I believe Ori is up next.
Everyone. So this is work done by Sanjay Mishra and myself. It's a result of work we've been doing with the Steering Video Alliance and architecture that we're calling open caching. Open caching basically is a kind of a CDNI, just that the CDN is a commercial CDN and the UCDN is a commercial CDN, and the DCDN is a CDN within the ISP. And it actually takes the takes out that we had while specifying and starting to implement it. And we came across lots of issues, and we started thinking how to solve them. And some of them we think we should get back into CDNI. So I've discussed what open caching is. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So we'll start with the easy stuff, just a bit about request routing. So the first thing we would like to discuss is how do we discover the request router address? Currently, this is not defined by CDNI. And the second one is, what do you do when you have to do fallback from the DCDN back to the UCDN? Next slide, please. So let's start with request router address. There are quite a lot of use cases why we need that. Two of them is that we want to have different request router addresses for different footprints. Some CDNs have global or nationwide presence, and we want to have different request routers for a different location. Another use case is scaling by adding more request routers. So again, this should be by footprint. So what we propose here is to add a new FCI object called request router address and just give that address per footprint. All our proposals here are not very fine-grained. I think we can discuss a lot about the syntax. It's just very initial proposals for your reference and feedback. So any question about this one? Next slide. So next one is UCDN fallback address. That's another use case that we have. In some cases, if there is no cache availability or the cache cannot properly handle the request, we would like to redirect the client back to the UCDN. So basic proposal is to add a new metadata generic object to specify the fallback address of the UCDN so that the DCDN can redirect back to that specific address. So it should probably look something like what we show here, but we can discuss later on the exact syntax. Okay, heavier stuff. So content management. So we define as content management all the stuff that has to be done on content. Basically, that means purge, revalidation, and invalidation. Everything is covered by RFC 8007. So nothing new here from the operation point of view. But along the way, we found that we need to add more stuff to the interface or to the RFC in order to implement everything that we wanted to do on content management. So first of all, the RFC proposes only a global pattern matching in order to match against the content. And the requirement for regular expression came a few times in order to do something more specific, in order to catch more specific assets and not to do overreaching or purging more content than is needed. So first proposal here is to add a content regex for the trigger specification. I know that it actually changes the trigger interface, but that's the first major proposal we have. I can stop here for questions or feedback or continue. Next. Next one, since we are in the Streaming Video Alliance, we focus on video. And when we're coming to do things like prepositioning, we find out that we need to give the DCDN a list of URLs for prepositioning, possibly the full list of the objects in the manifest. So it really makes sense in order to, instead of passing the full list within the trigger spec, to give a URL for the playlist, because that would be the most natural solution for a video CDN. So what we're proposing here is to add the option to pass playlist URLs in the trigger specification, allowing the DCDN to parse it as a playlist. It can be all those different types of playlists like HLS, MCU8, or MSS or Dash MPD, and parse them, and then just generate all the requests needed in order to do the prepositioning. Geo limits. So trigger, as it is specified right now, is applies to the full DCDN. And again, since DCDN can be, if it's an ISP CDN, it can be nationwide and sometimes even wider. And we want to be able to limit the operation to specific footprints. A good example for that would be from regulatory reason or business reason, you can't really put some object and specify the location that are controlled by the content provider. So our proposal here is to add a location object to this trigger spec. We could possibly use the MI location ACL. The issue here is that the MI location ACL was designed to be ACL on the client locations, and here we are talking about caches locations, which is different. So I'm not sure if it would be the right idea to use that same object, and maybe we should create a new object for that. So that's an issue to discuss. Next is schedule triggers. So it turns out that sometimes what you want to do is you want, especially in preposition use case, you want to trigger the downstream CDN to preposition, but you want it to be done in specific times. For example, if you want to pull a new episode of Game of Thrones, you want it to be done in the middle of the night rather than 9 p.m. because that's the whole idea. Do it before the peak time. So first of all, you would like to tell the DCDN, I want you to preposition, but I want you to preposition at that time. So next question could be, so why won't the UCDN just wait for that time and then send the trigger? So first, we want the trigger not just to have a start time, but also have an end time. But second, the actual time is the local time, because what we're trying to do is preposition in a specific local time per geography. And that calls for some new interface to be able to do a time scope and be able to tell that time scope is either local or UTC. So again, we're proposing to add a new time windows object to the trigger spec. And again, there's the question here if we could use the time window ACL of the metadata. And I think that in that case we can't, just because we need to add the local and the local option, but also because that object initially was designed to do to limit or to create an ACL on data usage rather than restricting an operation. So it's a little bit different. So that's also a discussion point if we want or need to define the new object.
I have a quick question for you on this one. So is the Unix epoch, isn't that already in UTC? Do you need to have a time zone there?
So it should be in Epoch, or possibly what we can do is do an Epoch plus an offset in order to define the local. I didn't mean to have like a full final syntax here, just to get the idea that we need to have something that can say we want it to be 9 or let's say 3 a.m. at local time. So we need to discuss how we can do that syntax wise. But
so can you just say, you know, the 3 o'clock in local time is whatever in UTC, and just store it, always pass it as UTC, like just a regular Unix timestamp?
yeah, but the problem is that 3 a.m. is different UTC in different locations. So let's just imagine I have to tell a nationwide CDN that I want them to pull the next episode of Game of Thrones, but I want them to do that in 3 a.m. depending on the local time. So how would I do that?
Well, if you're passing a time zone, presumably you're going to have to tell them multiple times anyway, right? I guess if you're doing it per time zone anyway, then setting a different time isn't a big deal. And if you're not, then you still have the same problem, I think.
So if I'm doing it per time zone, and so I'll need to pass different triggers for different time zones. And so then I need to have a trigger per time zone, and then I have that trigger should be geo limited to that specific. So that's kind of combination between the geo limit and the time limit. For that geography, I wanted to do in that UTC, and that other geography in other UTC, in another epoch. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're trying to specify a generic time, like 3 o'clock a.m., but you want each of the CDN instances to merge that requirement with the local time that it's serving out against, right? I'm not sure this does that yet, but it's close. So I'd suggest maybe just let's take this and tweak it to do that policy that it's a local. You want to apply the local serving time against this generic representation that can be sent out against any CDN. Because I get that you want to have the start and the end to be applicable to any CDN node that receives this, but you then want it to interpret it locally to the client as it's being served out
To the cache, not
Per
to the client, per cache.
Well,
right?
yes.
So I
Well,
agree.
actually, no, I'll take that back. You want per client, right? Because you want it served out. So if I send a preposition to Denver, and I say serve this at 3 a.m. For Denver clients, you want to serve at 3 a.m. But if it's a client gets directed for load balancing to that cache from Boston, you want to actually interpret against the Boston 3 a.m., not the Denver 3 a.m. It's a client side request, isn't it?
Well, I didn't think of it like that until now, but once now that you say that, that's possible. But I think the whole idea, the reason it was raised to begin with was that prepositioning comes to serve the purpose of content which is going to be massively used to be prepositioned ahead of time and at off-peak hours. So
Right. So this is an embargo. This is an embargo time.
Yeah.
For content release, and I think it's actually a very useful addition to Cdni as it stands. And by the way, I didn't declare myself for the whoever's taking blending Comcast, NBC, Universal. So I think this is a good requirement. I'm not sure it's capturing quite yet the notion that it's a localized time, whether it's localized to the client or localized to the cache, because the cache may serve out clients in other time zones. But it's I would say that it is a good requirement because it is something we do all the time in real life situations.
So I agree that it's very crude in this current status, but I'll be happy if we agree that this is an important requirement and we need to further work on it and find a way out to solve that, which is reasonable.
I mean, maybe one approach here is to merge it with the you previously had the geo filter tags. Maybe these interact with those.
So limited it for that geo for that time.
Right.
Something. Okay. So we can try and merge that. Okay. So next. Yep.
Sanjay Mishra. So I think Glenn is making a good point, but I think the requirement as we have thought about it is the restriction is on the local cache that is actually serving the content. So the instruction was meant to tell the local cache that if you are a cache serving content in Denver area, then you are restricted for that 3 p.m. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Ori, this is Kevin. I'm just going to insert myself here as chair. We've only got about 13 minutes left, and I know you're only about a third of the way through. So we may need to just pick it up a little bit, and then we'd like to get through all of the proposals from the SVA just so we all have an idea of what kind of changes we're looking for. And then at the end, the chairs are going to ask whether or not we want to look at taking on this work. So
I'll just run through and just make sure that everybody knows what I'm talking about, and then we can see how
cool
time is left. So another requirement is that we came by is, if you look back on the previous requirement, it turns out that when you do triggers, sometimes you need more functions. You need more abilities to pass something from the DCDN to the UCDN, and currently that's not possible. So what we are proposing here is to do some kind of a mechanism of trigger extensibility, similar to the metadata generic objects. And that way, even when it's not a fully specified CDNI object yet, implementation can start having something that actually works and pass objects between UCDN to DCDN and tells them to do something. One such an example would be, let's say I want you to do some invalidation, but under a given scope, or I want to do an invalidation, but only to stuff that you acquired in the last 2 hours because something happened in these 2 hours. This kind of requirements keeps coming up when we started to do specification and integration, and that's not something that we cannot do right now. So that's a requirement for the chairs to see if we can add something like that to triggers. Next. So when coming to do all those stuff to triggers, to adding more and more functions, or maybe generic or extendable functions, it turns out that it would be good if we can have them in the FCI as capabilities, because of course we are not planning everybody to support anything. So the same mechanism that applies to metadata by FCI telling I'm supporting that metadata object. Would it be good if we can have the same for triggers to say that FCI says I'm supporting that trigger object? Okay, more heavy stuff. So another issue that we're coming across is that when you start, when you start delegating traffic from DCDN to UCDN, then you come across all those request authentication and access control issues. URI signing is most notably the first one, and the idea for the DCDN to be able to implement the same URI signing, which is done between the content provider and the UCDN, becomes infeasible because there are many different client access controls and authentication schemes, and the DCDN cannot implement whatever it is you can find in the market right now that goes between content providers and commercial CDNs. And some of those algorithms are under NDA, and most of them are using symmetric keys, which cannot be provided to the DCDN. And eventually, we needed to think of some kind of a generic mechanism that will be able to accommodate all that. So I'll talk about a little bit about what we came up with, and I know that Phil here has a different view, and maybe we can reconcile both approaches into one thing. But I'll just go through it so you'll know that we have this issue. So next slide, please. So let's start with a URI signing case. So we propose a mechanism which we call, we started calling it split authentication, but then changed it to a relay token authentication. And it is really designed for the use cases of video, of long ABR sessions. And what we wanted to do is minimum exposure of the DCDN to the algorithms running in the UCDN and zero exposure of symmetric keys, and leave all the verification logic in the UCDN and enable the DCDN to verify consecutive requests using verification state. So, what we proposed here is that since video sessions are long and they are chunked into small requests, the DCDN can cache, can send a relay request to the UCDN for the first transaction. It can be a manifest transaction or the first transaction of the representation, of the video representation, get a response for the verification and cache that response for that specific session. And that session can be defined by the URL minus the chunk IDs plus the token, the signature token. And once that verification state is cached, the cache can repeatedly verify the next request against that state again and again until some TTL which was given by the UCDN. So basically, that's the whole idea. It does require, maybe next slide, it requires metadata. It requires new metadata because in the metadata, we will need to tell the cache that for that specific service or that specific metadata, the fields which should be used for the session are those specific fields. So it is different than the URI signing mechanism of Cdni in that it does actually require new metadata. And we need some FCI in order to advertise that we actually support that. So maybe Phil, you can refer to it and how we can reconcile between both approaches.
Yeah, so this is Phil Sorber. So I think this is really clever, the surrogate authentication part, so that you can do stuff and not have to basically pre-negotiate, make sure everybody can do everything. But the extra metadata adds a dependency because the URI signing can be mostly implemented without the other Cdni pieces. And then this is also putting like metadata relative to content, and it's having to put like the cache key directives in there. So I would basically like to see a way where we can get this merged with the URI signing in such a way that we can do both and not have to store like this the session state on the server side and be able to store it in the token. And the details, I think, I haven't really thought about them enough. We had a little side conversation, but I think there's a solution there somewhere where we could basically add surrogate validation to URI signing and then do the rest in more traditional URI signing ways.
So if I get it right, the idea is that we keep the original URI signing logic between the content providers and the UCDN at the UCDN, and put some new logic in order to do the surrogate between the UCDN and the DCDN, and that logic will be with some kind of a TTL. So the DCDN will have to repeatedly go and do a relay to the UCDN once in a while, possibly once in a long while, but still that's kind of a revocation mechanism that the UCDN has.
Yeah, so it'll basically do the validation against the UCDN, and then create its own session state in a new token, for example, and then pass that back and forth with the client through the regular, the token renewal method with a TTL. And when that TTL expires, then it has to go and redo the surrogate validation and start that process over. And then you get all the benefits of the claims, like the what was formerly the subject claim, and stuff like that, to do what you're talking about here. And TTL and client IP, if you want, that doesn't have to go into metadata. It can all go into the URI signing token.
Okay. Phil, Ori, we've got 3 minutes left, and I'd like to get to some chair questions. So I know you have logging and cores left. Can we just make a quick statement about each of those, please?
So I'm passing the mic to Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra. I'll be really quick here. So the CDNI spec actually does talk about the logging, but what is different here is that there were a couple of motivations that we had for proposing a alternative method. One is that CDNs have largely done implementations with the logging already in place, and they are currently using the squid-based logs. So we wanted to make sure that we can keep that flexibility that already exists for the CDNs to be able to use the logs. So the intent was that for anything that the DCDN delivers on behalf of the UCDN, we leverage the existing logging mechanism. So we wanted to just keep the squid logs as it is. The second question that came up was that is there a way for us to also leverage the transport mechanism that may exist, but that may already be supported by the CDNs? So we thought we can add a sort of a mechanism for DCDN and UCDN to negotiate what kind of transport mechanism that is already in place, so we can leverage that. So we added a provision here to allow CDNs to be able to negotiate transport method, which could be log stash, or it could be SFTP type, or any other method that might already exist. Next slide. So I'm just going to be really quick here.
Sanjay, we've got 1 minute left. I'm sorry. We only have 1 minute left. Can we...
All right. So we can, I can skip this section here. It's pretty self-explanatory as it is, so we can leave the minute for you here.
I'm sorry, I think I have to cut you off. The chairs still would like to ask their questions to the working group. I think folks should go and read the draft that Ori and Sanjay put out. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here that I think would be good to add. But at this point, Phil, if we could just go to the last slide. Okay, so at the last IETF, the question was raised about adding additional work, and so we wanted to get a gauge here today of whether folks are interested in taking on the HTTPS delegation stuff, as well as the SVA open caching stuff. I had convinced myself, and I think I had convinced Alexi prior, that what we were looking at would still fall within the scope of the existing charter. But given the stuff that was discussed today, I think we've definitely gone beyond the scope of our existing charter. So I'd like to get an idea of, is this stuff that we would like to work on, that working group would like to work on? And if so, then we can start thinking about how we need to address rechartering in order to take on this work. So the first question I'd like to do a hum on is, do we have interest in doing HTTPS delegation? I don't think I can hear the hum, so Phil, this is going to be all you. If you think that we should take on HTTPS delegation, understanding that there's a lot to be worked out there, and we'll decide that as a working group, please hum now. And if you're opposed, Phil?
Yeah. So I heard maybe 2 for yes and 1 for no.
Okay.
It was very little humming.
Okay. And then I'd like to ask the same question for the open caching stuff. If you think that this is interesting stuff that we should work on, please hum now. And if you are opposed,
All right. I heard several for yes and nothing for no.
okay. That's good. We will, of course, go and ask the list as well. I apologize that we ran out of time, but I appreciate everyone coming. We are out of time. We're over time. So I hope you all have a safe flight back and enjoyed your week in Singapore. And we will see you in London.